The sound of 37 Holstein cattle mooing in unison at 6 in the morning is something you never forget, especially when they're standing on your HOA president's perfectly manicured front lawn, leaving behind what can only be described as nature's most aromatic calling cards. But to understand how we got to this point, where I became the most wanted man in Willowbrook Estates, we need to go back 3 months to when Karen Pemberton decided my century-old family ranch was her personal crusade. My name is Jake Morrison, and I've been raising cattle on the same 200 acres my grandfather settled in 1923. Back then, this was all open rangeland as far as the eye could see. Now, thanks to suburban sprawl, half my property line borders Willowbrook Estates, one of those cookie-cutter developments where every house looks identical and the grass is so perfect it might as well be painted green. For 15 years, we'd coexisted peacefully. My cattle grazed in their pastures, the suburbanites watered their lawns, and everyone minded their own business. The wooden fence between our properties had weathered to a silvery gray, and morning glory vines had woven themselves through the boards, creating a natural barrier that was actually quite beautiful. That changed on a sweltering Tuesday morning in July when Karen Pemberton moved into 1247 Maple Lane, the house directly adjacent to my north pasture. I first saw her standing at her kitchen window, arms crossed, staring out at my cattle like they'd personally offended her. Karen was the type of woman who probably color-coordinated her sock drawer and had strong opinions about the proper way to fold fitted sheets. Her blonde hair was pulled back so tight it could have been used as a torture device, and even from a distance, I could see the disapproval radiating from her like heat waves off summer asphalt. The next morning, I was fixing a water trough when I heard the sharp click of high heels on concrete. I looked up to see Karen marching across her backyard, wearing a crisp white blouse and navy slacks at 7 in the morning, carrying what appeared to be a clipboard and a tape measure. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice carrying the particular tone that women use when they're about to ruin your entire day. "Are you the owner of these animals?" I straightened up, wiping my hands on my jeans. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Jake Morrison. These are my cattle." She wrinkled her nose as if the word cattles tasted bad. "I'm Karen Pemberton, the new HOA president. I've been reviewing the community guidelines, and I believe there may be some violations happening here." I glanced at the fence line between us. "Ma'am, this is my property. Has been for 3 generations. The HOA doesn't have any jurisdiction over my ranch." Karen's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "Oh, but that's where you're wrong, Mr. Morrison. You see, any property that impacts the aesthetic and property values of our community falls under our purview. And these smelly, noisy animals are definitely impacting our quality of life." One of my cows, a gentle Holstein named Bessie, chose that moment to let out a long, echoing moo. Karen actually took a step backward, clutching her clipboard like a shield. "They're just cows, Mrs. Pemberton. They've been here a lot longer than your development." "Well, times change," she snapped. "And I intend to see that they change appropriately. You'll be hearing from me soon." As she click-clacked back to her house, I noticed she was taking photos of everything: my fence, my cattle, even my old red barn. Little did I know she was already planning her first attack. 3 days later, an envelope arrived in my mailbox with the Willowbrook Estates logo embossed in gold. Inside was a formal notice, typed on official letterhead. I read it twice, then called my lawyer, Mike Patterson, who'd handled my family's legal affairs for years. "Jake, this is ridiculous," Mike said after I read him the notice over the phone. "They have absolutely no authority over your property. Your ranch predates their development by decades, and you're not bound by their HOA covenants. So I can ignore this? Legally, yes. But knowing Karen Pemberton's reputation from other cases I've handled, She's not going to give up easily. Be prepared for this to get uglier." Mike was right. 2 weeks later, I was in my south pasture checking on a pregnant heifer when I heard the rumble of diesel engines. I looked toward the road to see 3 county code enforcement trucks parked at my gate, along with Karen's pristine white BMW. The lead inspector, a heavy-set man named Rodriguez, approached with a clipboard that made Karen's look like a sticky note. "Mr. Morrison, we've received complaints about your property. We need to conduct an inspection." "What kind of complaints?" Rodriguez glanced uncomfortably toward Karen, who was standing by the gate like a general surveying a battlefield. "Allegations of unsanitary conditions, potential groundwater contamination, and violations of county setback requirements." I felt heat rising in my chest. For the next 2 hours, I followed the inspectors around my property while they measured, photographed, and documented everything from my manure management system to the distance between my barn and the property line. Karen remained at the gate the entire time, occasionally pointing and whispering to anyone who would listen. The good news was that my ranch passed every inspection with flying colors. The bad news was that Karen's face, when Rodriguez delivered the all clear, looked like she'd just watched someone kick a puppy. "This isn't over," she hissed as the inspectors loaded their equipment. "There are other ways to handle problem neighbors." As I watched her drive away, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was planning something bigger. And that's when I noticed the survey stakes. The survey stakes appeared overnight, like mushrooms after rain-thin metal rods with bright orange flags, running along the entire fence line between my property and the subdivision. I counted 23 of them, each one marking exactly where my fence stood. I was examining one of the stakes when my neighbor from the subdivision, an elderly man named Bill, who actually liked watching my cattle, came over to the fence. "Jake, you might want to know what's happening," he said, glancing nervously toward Karen's house. "She's claiming your fence is on HOA property. Says the original developer made some kind of mistake, and she's going to prove you've been trespassing for years." My blood ran cold. If Karen could prove the fence line was wrong, she could force me to move it back, potentially losing several acres of my best grazing land. That afternoon, I drove to the county courthouse to pull the original property surveys and deeds. What I found in those dusty files made my stomach drop. There was indeed a discrepancy, not in Karen's favor, but in mine. According to the original 1,923 survey and subsequent property transfers, my fence was actually 3 feet inside my own property line, meaning I owned an additional strip of land that the HOA had been maintaining as part of their common area. I was studying the documents when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Enjoy your little victory while it lasts. I have other plans. K.P." The next morning, I discovered what she meant. Every single one of my cattle had been tagged with bright orange stickers reading a GRIC, ULELN, UISANCEUR, EMO, VALPE, NDING. Karen had somehow accessed my property during the night and tagged my animals like they were cars in a tow-away zone. The sheer audacity of it left me speechless. She'd committed trespassing, vandalism, and harassment of livestock, all apparently to make some kind of point. I called the sheriff's department, and Deputy Martinez arrived within an hour. He took photos, documented the trespassing, and assured me that charges would be filed. But as he was leaving, he paused at his car door. "Jake, you might want to be extra careful. Word around town is that Karen Pemberton has been making phone calls to Austin, talking to state agricultural inspectors about your operation." That evening, as I was removing the orange tags from confused and agitated cattle, I made a decision. Karen wanted to escalate this war. Fine, but she clearly didn't understand who she was dealing with. I'd been ranching this land for 20 years, and my family had been working Texas soil for a century. We didn't back down from fights, especially fights we didn't start. But I had no idea she'd already made her next move. The call came at 5:47 a.m. on a Thursday. I was already up, heading out for morning chores, when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Mr. Morrison? This is Dr. Sarah Chen from the Texas Department of Agriculture. I'm calling to inform you that we've received a formal complaint about your cattle operation. We'll need to conduct an immediate inspection of your facilities. I sat down hard on my porch steps. What kind of complaint? Allegations of animal cruelty, unsanitary conditions, and potential disease vectors that could affect neighboring properties. The complaint was quite detailed and included photographs. Karen had gone nuclear. A state agricultural investigation could shut me down for months, even if I was eventually cleared. The bureaucratic nightmare alone could bankrupt a small ranch. Dr. Chen arrived that afternoon with 2 assistants and enough equipment to perform surgery. She was a slight Asian woman with kind eyes who clearly knew her business. As we walked through my facilities, I could see her surprise at the quality of my operation. Mr. Morrison, I have to say, whoever filed this complaint either has never seen your ranch or has some other agenda. Your facilities are actually above average for operations your size. The woman who filed it has never set foot on my property except to trespass and vandalize my cattle. Dr. Chen raised an eyebrow. Vandalize? I showed her photos of the orange tags, and her expression grew serious. Mr. Morrison, filing false reports with state agencies is a felony. If this complaint was knowingly fraudulent, the complainant could face significant legal consequences. After 3 hours of inspection, Dr. Chen gave me a clean bill of health and promised to include in her report that the complaint appeared to be motivated by personal animosity rather than legitimate concerns. But as I walked her to her truck, she paused. You should know, the complainant also filed a report with the EPA about potential groundwater contamination from your operation. That investigation could take months. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Karen wasn't just trying to annoy me anymore. She was trying to destroy my livelihood using government bureaucracy as a weapon. That night, I sat on my porch with a beer, staring out at my cattle peacefully grazing in the moonlight. These animals had been my life for 2 decades. My grandfather had started this ranch with nothing but determination and a handful of cattle. My father had expanded it through the lean years of the HOA. And now some suburban busybody with a clipboard and a superiority complex was trying to end it all because she didn't like the view from her kitchen window. I was about to head inside when I heard the sound of vehicles on my property. Grabbing a flashlight, I jogged toward the sound and discovered Karen's BMW parked by my cattle gate, along with 2 pickup trucks I didn't recognize. As I got closer, I could see Karen directing 2 men who were setting up what looked like sound equipment. They had massive speakers pointed directly at my cattle. "Hey!" I shouted, breaking into a run. "What the hell are you doing?" Karen spun around, and in the flashlight beam, her face looked like something from a horror movie, all sharp angles and cold fury. Just giving your animals a taste of what they put my neighbors through every morning. One of the men hit a switch, and suddenly my pasture was filled with a deafening sound of car horns, sirens, and what sounded like a construction site on steroids. My cattle, already nervous from the strange lights and people, panicked. They scattered in all directions, bellowing in fear and confusion. "Turn it off!" I yelled over the noise. "You're terrifying them?" Karen laughed, actually laughed, as my animals ran in panic. Not so fun when someone else is making the noise, is it? That's when something inside me snapped. I'd tried to be reasonable. I'd followed every legal channel. I'd endured her harassment, her false reports, her trespassing, and her attempts to destroy my business. But watching her laugh while my animals suffered was the last straw. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. I need sheriff's deputies at 1845 County Road 42. I have trespassers on my property harassing my livestock with sound equipment. Karen's laughter died. You can't prove anything. It's just noise. Ma'am, harassment of livestock is a felony in Texas. And you're trespassing on private property with intent to cause damage. I've got video of the whole thing. I held up my phone, which I'd been recording with since the moment I spotted her car. The color drained from Karen's face as she realized I'd documented her entire operation. The deputies arrived within minutes, but Karen and her accomplices were long gone, leaving behind only trampled grass and scattered equipment cables. But they'd made a crucial mistake in their haste to escape. They'd left behind one of the speakers, and it had Karen's address label on it. As I calmed my cattle and assessed the damage, I knew this war had entered a new phase. Karen had escalated beyond harassment into criminal behavior. But what I didn't know was that she'd already set her final trap in motion. The envelope arrived by certified mail on a Monday morning. Unlike Karen's previous amateur hour notices, this one came from Henderson, Walsh & Associates, one of Austin's most expensive law firms. My hands actually trembled as I opened it. The legal language was dense and intimidating, but the message was clear. Karen was claiming that my ranch constituted a continuing nuisance that was damaging property values throughout Willowbrook Estates. She was demanding I remove all cattle within 30 days or face a lawsuit seeking damages in excess of $500,000. $500,000. More than my ranch was worth. More than I could ever hope to pay. I called Mike Patterson immediately. Mike, she's got a big city law firm now. What are my options? I'll need to review this carefully, but Jake, fighting a firm like Henderson, Walsh could cost you everything even if you win. They'll bury us in paperwork and depositions until you're bankrupt. That afternoon, I was repairing fence when I saw Karen walking the property line with two men in expensive suits. One was taking photographs, while the other made notes on a legal pad. They were building their case, documenting every aspect of my operation that could be construed as a nuisance. I watched them for nearly an hour, feeling helpless as they cataloged my life's work like evidence in a crime scene. When they finished, Karen looked directly at me across the fence. 30 days, Mr. Morrison, she called out. Then this becomes very expensive for you. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the lawsuit papers, trying to figure out how a simple ranching operation had become a legal nightmare. My cattle were healthy, my facilities were clean, and I'd been operating legally for decades. But none of that mattered if Karen had enough money to drag me through court until I was broke. I was about to give up when I remembered something Dr. Chen had mentioned during her inspection. I dug through my files until I found her business card and called her personal number. Dr. Chen, this is Jake Morrison, the rancher you inspected last month. I need to ask you something about the complaint Karen Pemberton filed. What can I help you with? You mentioned that filing false reports was a felony. Do you still have copies of her original complaint? I do. And Mr. Morrison, I've been thinking about this case. The photographs she submitted were clearly manipulated, and her claims about animal cruelty were not only false, but knowingly false. She included details about conditions that don't exist on your property. My heart started racing. Would you be willing to testify to that? Absolutely. What she did was not only illegal, it wasted state resources and damaged the reputation of a legitimate ranching operation. After I hung up, I called Mike Patterson. Mike, what if we could prove Karen filed false reports with state agencies? That's a felony, Jake. It could mean serious jail time. Why? I explained Dr. Chen's findings, and I could hear the excitement in Mike's voice. This changes everything. We're not just defending against her lawsuit anymore, we're going on offense. But the next morning brought news that made my stomach drop. Bill, my elderly neighbor, came to the fence looking pale and shaken. "Jake, I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but Karen's called an emergency HOA meeting for tonight. She's claiming you threatened her and her family. She's asking for authority to seek a restraining order. A restraining order could prevent me from operating my ranch entirely." Karen wasn't just trying to win anymore, she was trying to eliminate me completely. And that's when I realized she'd made one final, fatal mistake. The emergency HOA meeting was held at the Willowbrook Estates Community Center, a beige building that looked like every other community center in America. I arrived early and parked across the street, wanting to observe before I made my presence known. Residents filtered in looking confused and concerned. Most of these people had been my neighbors for years, and while they might not have loved the smell of cattle in the morning, they'd never had any real problems with me. Karen arrived in her BMW, followed by her expensive lawyers. She was dressed like she was heading to court, navy suit, briefcase, and an expression that could have curdled milk. I waited until the meeting started, then walked in just as Karen began her presentation. The room fell silent as I entered, and I could see the surprise on Karen's face. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, "I think you should hear both sides of this story." Karen's lawyer immediately stood up. "Mr. Morrison, you're not a member of this association. You have no right to be here." "Actually," I said, pulling out a folder of documents, "I have every right. Because according to the original property surveys, Karen's house and half this development is built on land that belongs to me." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. I walked to the front and spread out the century-old survey maps I'd discovered at the courthouse. My grandfather settled this land in 1923. When Willowbrook Estates was developed, the developer made a critical error in the property surveys. According to the original deed and subsequent property transfers, my ranch extends approximately 50 feet into what you now consider your community. Karen's face had gone from pale to bright red. "That's impossible. I had the property surveyed when I bought my house." "Yes, you did. And that survey was based on the developer's incorrect 1987 plat, not the original 1923 land grant." I turned to address the room. "Which means that everyone living in houses 1247 through 1267 Maple Lane, including Mrs. Pemberton, is technically squatting on my property." The lawyer was frantically flipping through papers, but I could see from his expression that he was finding exactly what I'd found, a paper trail that clearly supported my claim. "But here's the thing," I continued. "I'm not interested in displacing families or disrupting your community. I've been a good neighbor for 15 years, and I plan to continue being one. All I want is to ranch my land in peace, the way my family has done for a century." I turned to face Karen directly. "Mrs. Pemberton, you've spent 3 months trying to destroy my livelihood through harassment, false reports, trespassing, and frivolous lawsuits. You've committed multiple felonies, including filing false reports with state agencies, reports that Dr. Sarah Chen from the Texas Department of Agriculture is prepared to testify were knowingly fraudulent." Karen's lawyer grabbed her arm, whispering urgently in her ear, but she shook him off. "You can't prove any of that," she snapped. "Actually, I can." I pulled out my phone and played a recording of our conversation during the sound equipment incident. In the crystal clear audio, Karen could be heard admitting to multiple acts of harassment and expressing her intent to force me off my land. The room was dead silent. Even Karen's lawyer looked like he wanted to disappear. "So here's what's going to happen," I said calmly. "Mrs. Pemberton, you're going to withdraw your lawsuit, publicly apologize for your harassment campaign, and never set foot on my property again. In exchange, I'll allow the HOA to purchase the strip of land your houses are built on for the fair market value, about $50,000 total. And if I don't, Karen's voice was barely a whisper. Then I exercise my full property rights. That means eviction notices for half the subdivision, criminal charges for filing false reports, and a civil lawsuit for harassment that will make your $500,000 threat look like pocket change. Karen's lawyer was now pulling her toward the exit, clearly recognizing that his client had no legal ground to stand on. But I wasn't finished. The next morning, I was feeding my cattle when I heard the familiar rumble of the livestock trailer. But this time, I was the one who had called for it. I'd spent all night thinking about Karen's harassment campaign, her attempts to destroy my ranch, and especially that moment when she'd laughed while my cattle panicked. She'd wanted to prove that my animals were a nuisance? Fine. I'd give her a first-hand demonstration of what a real nuisance looked like. The trailer pulled up to my gate, and my friend Tommy climbed out of the cab. "You sure about this, Jake?" "This is about as petty as it gets. Tommy, that woman has spent 3 months trying to destroy everything my family built. She filed false reports with the state, trespassed on my property, and terrorized my animals for her own amusement. She wants to see what a cattle operation really looks like. I'm going to educate her." We spent the next hour loading 37 head of cattle into trailers. Not all of my herd, I wasn't crazy enough to risk all my animals on a stunt like this. But 37 healthy, well-fed cattle make quite an impression. At exactly 6:00 a.m., just as the first commuters were heading to work, our convoy of livestock trailers pulled into Willowbrook Estates. The perfectly manicured streets had probably never seen anything more agricultural than a riding mower. We drove straight to 1247 Maple Lane, where Karen's pristine white BMW sat in the driveway of her pristine house with its pristine lawn. I had Tommy back the first trailer right up to the edge of her property, the property that, according to the survey, was technically mine anyway. "Let 'em out, boys," I called. 37 cattle poured out of those trailers, like water from a broken dam. They spread across Karen's front yard, her backyard, and her neighbors' yards, mooing with the enthusiasm of animals who had just discovered the world's largest salad bar. The perfectly trimmed grass was irresistible to cattle, who usually grazed on rough pasture. They settled in like they'd found paradise, munching contentedly while leaving behind the aromatic evidence of their presence. I was setting up a folding chair on the sidewalk public property, perfectly legal, when Karen's front door exploded open. She stood in her doorway wearing a pink bathrobe, her hair sticking up in all directions, looking like she'd just witnessed the apocalypse. "WHATHAVEYOUDONE?" she shrieked. "Oh, good morning, Mrs. Pemberton," I called cheerfully. "Just exercising my property rights. According to the survey, this is all technically my land, so I thought I'd bring my cattle over to graze. Hope you don't mind the noise. I know how much you hate agricultural operations." A Holstein named Daisy chose that moment to deposit a steaming pile right in the middle of Karen's prized rose garden. Karen's scream was probably heard 3 counties over. By now, neighbors were emerging from their houses, some laughing, some recording with their phones, all clearly enjoying the spectacle. Bill, my elderly neighbor, was actually applauding from his porch. Karen's lawyer appeared beside her, still in his pajamas, looking like a man who'd just realized his career was taking a very strange turn. "Mr. Morrison, this is harassment?" he called out. "No, sir," I replied, settling into my chair with a thermos of coffee. "Harassment is filing false reports with state agencies. Harassment is trespassing on someone's property to terrorize their animals. This is just ranching." A young bull decided Karen's BMW, "You looked like an interesting scratching post," and began rubbing against it, leaving muddy marks along the pristine white paint. "GETTHEMAWAYFROMMYCAR." Karen screamed. "Oh, I'd be happy to," I said, not moving from my chair. "Just as soon as you sign this." I held up the withdrawal papers for her lawsuit and a formal apology letter my lawyer had prepared. Karen's face cycled through several shades of red and purple. "You can't do this." "I'll call the police." "Go ahead. But you might want to remember that you're technically on my property right now. And after your little stunt with the sound equipment, I think the sheriff's department knows exactly who the real troublemaker is around here." For 20 minutes, Karen alternated between screaming threats and pleading with her lawyer to make it stop. Meanwhile, my cattle continued their leisurely breakfast, thoroughly enjoying the tender suburban grass and leaving their mark on every manicured surface. Finally, Karen's lawyer walked over with a defeated expression. "Mr. Morrison, my client is prepared to sign your documents." "Excellent," I said, standing and brushing off my jeans. "I'll get the cattle loaded up just as soon as the ink's dry." Karen signed the papers with shaking hands, tears of rage streaming down her face. The formal apology was particularly satisfying. It included acknowledgement of her harassment campaign and admission that my ranch operation was legal and professional. As my crew began loading the cattle back into trailers, Karen stood in her devastated yard, surrounded by trampled flowers and organic fertilizer, watching her perfect suburban paradise get restored to its agricultural roots. "This isn't over," she whispered as I walked past. "Oh, but it is," I replied. "Because if you ever bother me again, next time I'm bringing the pigs." As I drove my cattle home, I couldn't stop smiling. Karen had spent 3 months trying to prove that my ranch was a nuisance, and in the end, she was absolutely right. When you corner a rancher and threaten everything he's worked for, you discover that we can be the biggest nuisance of all. The video of Karen's front yard went viral on social media apparently. There's something universally satisfying about watching a bully get their comeuppance delivered by a herd of cattle. The HOA paid me $50,000 for the land rights. Karen never bothered me again, and my ranch continued operating just as it had for nearly a century. Sometimes the best way to deal with someone who thinks they can push you around is to show them exactly what you're capable of when you stop being polite and start being creative. Karen learned that morning that you should never mess with a man whose business involves managing 1,000 pounds of attitude on 4 legs. After all, when you're dealing with bull on a daily basis, you get pretty good at dishing it out yourself.